Yeah, they're muted.
Morning, morning. Yeah. Delegates, could you take in your seats, please? We'll start in a minute or so.
Where is she? She's here, I thought. Christina's talking to her earlier. Where's Christina?
If people outside the hall could come in and take your seats with your delegations.
I want to leave her there. You see there in the middle.
If any delegation leaders have got people still outside the hall, could you ask them to take their seats? Christina's away the wrong way.
There's always one. It's always Christina. Right, yeah.
Congress, I call Congress to order. If you could take your seats, please. Welcome, delegates, to Congress House. I'm Matt Rack. I'm the General Secretary of the Fire Brigade Union and currently President of the TUC. And I've great pleasure in opening this special TUC Congress to debate our response to the government's minimum service level legislation. It's been over 40 years since the special Congress took place to fight Margaret Thatcher's anti-union legislation in 1982. And here, again, is another right-wing Tory government launching another attack on our movement. And today we meet in solidarity, determined to resist that attack. Congress, I'll start with some housekeeping. If there is an emergency, you will receive instructions from me. There are no fire alarm tests scheduled. If you hear the alarm, it is for real. Details of evacuation procedures can be found in your delegate briefing, and the evacuation procedures are also displayed on the walls at the back hall entry and by exit doors. I would remind all delegates to comply and adhere to the TUC Code of Conduct in relation to respect to other delegates, visitors and to TUC staff. We will have a speech to text and a BSL interpreter for the duration of this special Congress. Delegates, I would like to pay tribute to our trade union colleagues who have died since Congress in September. The trade union movement sends its deepest condolences and solidarity to the family and friends of much respected colleagues who've all contributed so much to the trade union movement. Michelle McCrossan, GMB Midlands. Michelle led the GMB fight against the pay discrimination facing working women in Birmingham and across the Midlands. Her belief in the GMB and the fight for equal pay is what drove her. Jane Loftus, the CWU President. Jane joined the Post Office in January 1982 and was an active member and union rep since 1983. Jane worked at Royal Mail, representing administration members at local, divisional and national level. From 2002, she served on the National Executive and the Postal Executive. She was elected in 2007 as the first woman chair of the Postal Constituency and national president of the CWU. Jane was also a member of the TUC General Council from 2019 to 2023. Christine Estev, who worked in the TUC Press Department from 1991 to 1998. Charles Diver, who was a bar manager in the National Education Centre from 1992 to 2000. We will remember these colleagues formally at next year's Congress, but for now, can I ask you to join me in a minute's applause in memory of our colleagues. Thank you, Congress. Yeah. Congress, as we've mentioned, this is 40 years since we held a special Congress to tackle another attack on our movement. We face a huge threat through the minimum service level legislation, attacking the right of workers to take collective action in defence of pay, jobs and conditions. And let's remember that during the COVID pandemic, this government and its leaders clapped key workers and praised them. And now the very same government attacks the very same people, the very same group of workers. What a disgraceful attack on working people. And why are we here? We're here, delegates, because Congress in September decided we should reconvene to defend and prepare our campaign in opposition to the minimum service level legislation. As President, I just want to remind ourselves of a couple of risks. There are risks, and I've followed the debate at the Executive and at the General Council. There are risks in over-promising. And let's remember that in 1982, sadly, we did not defeat Thatcher's attacks. And on the subject of that government, I know there's been a bit of debate around the role of Margaret Thatcher recently. I'll give my recollections. I was a young worker starting out in my life in the workplace, and my recollection of that government is of a viciously anti-working class government led by a viciously anti-working class Prime Minister whose policies devastated industries, entire communities and indeed entire regions, whose government and policies attacked this movement explicitly and without relent. So let's not forget that when we discuss that government and its records. There are also other risks facing our movement as we debate these issues today. There are risks of passivity and meek compliance. It's not good enough simply to wait for political change. We all want political change, and that general election cannot come quick enough for any of us in this room here today. But if we simply acquiesce to these attacks, let's be no doubt whatsoever that those attacks will continue. This government or its successors will bring further attacks onto our movement. And I'd like to remind Congress of some earlier special congresses, which were somewhat more successful, because on the 5th of June 1969, this Congress met in special session to discuss the then Labour government's in place of strife documents, and we did force them back on that issue. On the 18th of March 1971, this Congress met in special session to discuss the then Industrial Relations Bill. And let's not remember what happened after that, because mass action by working people, strike action, occupations, defeated the Industrial Relations Act. We should remember those victories as well as the setbacks that we've had in the past. Now, we accept that the world has changed, industries have changed, our movement has changed. The workplace organisation, the shop stewards movement that existed in the 1970s may not be there in the same way that it was at the time. But our task as a movement, in unity, is precisely to rebuild that type of movement for the challenges of the 21st century. Those are the tasks that we have to set ourselves today. Let's remind ourselves why we are here now. Why is it that this government has acted now? They've acted because we acted. They've acted because our workers acted. They've acted because workers took strike action on a huge level over the past 18 months. In December 2022, some 829,000 days were lost due to strike action. And I say, as the president of the TUC, we make no apologies for workers standing up and defending themselves in strike action. We are proud of the health workers, the rail workers, the teachers and other education workers who took strike action to defend living standards. And for many people, that was their first experience of mass collective action. And it will have been an exhilarating and uplifting experience to see the strength of themselves and their workmates standing up for themselves and resisting the attacks of the bosses. And out of that, we need to build a new generation of people who will fight for our future. And why did workers fight? Workers fought because of the cost of living crisis, because while profits boomed and prices soared, workers struggled. Because the Tory strategy is to make our people pay the price for others' economic failures, and we resist that as well. And we're here today to discuss our strategies and our tactics coming out of Congress in September. Yes, we'll explore all routes and avenues to attack and defeat this legislation. But above all, for me, this has to be about building our own strength and our own confidence. If I can finish, as a bit of a fan of the Wobblies, if I can quote from a song, "Without our brain and muscle, not a single wheel can move, can turn." And that was we were reminded of that again during the COVID pandemic. Without workers, nothing happens. Schools and hospitals cannot function without workers. Without workers, trains do not move. Food is not picked and produced and processed and sold. Nothing happens without working people. And when we have the ability to realise that collectively and then act collectively on the basis of that knowledge, we have an immense power in our hands, a power that can stop these attacks and actually can go much further and change things in this society and much wider. Those are the sort of challenges that we need to discuss today. I'm pleased to open this Congress. Thanks, Conference. Right, Congress, let me explain how today's business will take place. In a moment, we'll hear from our first panel of workers who are set to be affected by the minimum service legislation. I'll then invite the General Secretary to give his opening remarks. That will be followed by a second panel of workers. I will then invite Paddy Lillis to move a statement on behalf of the General Counsel, to be seconded by Christina McInerney. Finally, we'll call the General Secretary to close the debate before moving to a vote on the General Counsel statement. I hope that is clear. Okay, I'll now hand over to TUC Assistant General Secretary Kate Bell to introduce the first panel. But first, Congress, please let's thank them for being here today with us.
Good morning, Congress. So before we talk about what's next in our campaign against minimum service levels, we're really privileged to be hearing directly from the workers who the government has targeted with their crackdown on the right to strike. Everyone on this panel and the panel we're going to hear from later works in a job and represents a union that will be directly hit by the government's plans. So we're going to get straight into it. Sarah, let's hear from you first. Sarah Roder's a secondary school teacher and NEU rep. And Sarah, you were involved in strike action last year. Can you tell us a bit about that strike action and the impact it had?
Yeah, so last year we were on strike basically for what would have constituted as our 17th consecutive pay cut. Previously to that, the last strike action we took was about, don't quote me on it, about 15 years previously on pensions. We didn't actually get what we wanted on that, but we did win some concessions. The impact of that has been that we are primarily a very young workforce. To be honest, there isn't really very much collective memory of what it means to ballot, what it means to be on strike. And I think since then we've seen a huge increase in younger teachers becoming reps, and we've seen a lot more local action, particularly this term. So the big question is, what does this minimum service bill mean for those actions going forward?
Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. And it's been amazing to see so many young teachers on the picket line. So let's hear from you, Simon. Simon Day's a paramedic. He's a GMB branch secretary in the West Midlands. And Simon, you've been on strike too. Can you tell us a bit about that experience and how the minimum service levels are going to affect ambulance workers?
Yeah, thanks. Just to start off, it's a great privilege to be here, but it's blooming frustrating to be here as well, isn't it? I think strike within the ambulance service was very unexpected on one level. We've balloted before and never been successful, but I think that for that moment in time, there was a surge and a wave of despondency amongst workers who wanted to see action. And strike gave us a platform to blow away the myths and the lies that government had put out about the NHS, the broader NHS. I remember sitting on an ambulance after our first day of strike action with Edna, a 93-year-old, waiting for hours on end outside a hospital. And the conversation went along the lines of, I'm really sorry you've waited so long for an ambulance. I'm really sorry you're waiting so long in an ambulance outside a hospital. And Edna said, it's okay, Simon, because when you win, we win. And that was the point that ambulance service staff really brought home, and strike gave them a powerful platform to bring home, was that their action was not just for them as individuals, not just for them collectively, but for the NHS as a whole. And that includes patients and employers. You know, I sit here today in uniform because my employer does not want to have to deal with MSLs. They would much rather negotiate with us individually, because we are an individual ambulance service in the West Midlands, and national top-down parameters will not meet the needs of that ambulance service in that situation. We all operate differently across the trusts. So it was a window into what we can do and a window into what we're going to lose if we lose the right to strike.
Thanks so much, Simon. And that when you win, we win is an amazing message for us to be taking throughout the Congress today. So Maxine, let's hear from you. Maxine Luby's a college lecturer and she's UCU's president-elect. So Maxine, tell us a bit about the challenges facing college workers who are in dispute.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kate. To start with, in college further education, that includes prisons and adult education, we haven't seen a real terms pay rise in over 10 years. You know, there's been an erosion of 35% in real terms. Our workloads are unsafe. We are trying up the best to make sure that our students get the service that they need and progress onto the courses they need to and into employment. But constantly, the employer is pushing back against that. If this is introduced, and it's really hard for us to get people to come out on strike, we've done really well over the last couple of years. We've never seen a wave of strike action in further education in the longest time, if ever. And the same in universities as well. We have to keep pushing back against this because strike action is the only thing we have, it's the only power we have as workers to push back against employers. And what we don't want is for that to happen, for that to take place, and workers to be afraid to take strike action because they may lose a job. So we've really got to push back against this in every way that we can.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Maxine. Now, we were hoping we were going to have Mark Boothroyd with us from Unite. Unfortunately, he's sick. I know all Congress will be sending a get well message to him today. So let's turn to you, Pete. So Pete Wright is a border security worker in Kent and president of his PCS branch. So Pete, tell us a bit about your recent strike action.
Thanks, Kate. I mean, first of all, it's just to say that it was a significant piece of work to actually get the industrial action ballot over the 50% threshold. And our members were so angered by the pay awards that they'd had in previous years that not only did we meet the threshold, but we well exceeded it. I mean, to put it into perspective, in 21-22, our members received 0. Absolutely nothing. The following year, the most experienced officers, the ones that are checking passports and checking for customs work, got a consolidated pay rise of £259. In the midst of a cost of living crisis, that was £4 a week. After taking targeted action at both the airports and the maritime ports, and also action within our passport office, we received an average pay rise of 8% and a £1,500 non-consolidated payment. Now, we've got no doubt that that shift from 0 and £4 a week to 8% came about as a result of our members taking industrial action. In the media, the government would have you believe that the action that our members took at the ports and airports had absolutely no impact. It therefore seems really incredibly strange that they're now introducing legislation to stop our members from taking action, despite the fact that there was no impact whatsoever. I mean, we've got to be clear on this, delegates, that this is a direct attack on our fundamental human right to take industrial action. And we have got to fight back against this. Because it's thanks to the industrial action that we took that our members got a reasonable pay rise. But the industrial action we took wasn't just about pay rises. It was about the arbitrary cut in civil servants across the board of 91,000 jobs. It was also about the fact that they sought to cut the compensation terms for those that were going to lose their jobs by a third. Now, our action has got rid of the arbitrary staff cuts. It's also got an agreement that they won't approach the compensation terms within this current administration. Now, we remain in dispute over pension contributions, which we're going to be fighting through legal action. But now the government are trying to prevent our members from fighting for their rights and limiting the way in which that we can actually fight for our members. We've got to fight this.
Thank you so much, Pete. And I think this whole Congress knows that it was your action that moved the government and your action that scared the government too. So last but by no means least, let's hear from Dawn. Dawn Stewart's a train driver. She's an ASLEF rep. Dawn, tell us about your ongoing dispute and the impact that minimum service levels might have on the railways.
So, obviously this week we've had it's been quite a good demonstration of the minimal service that we've been running due to us withdrawing our overtime. So this is an excellent way of displaying, if the government want a 40% service, the safety implications that that's going to give us on platforms. Safety is paramount on the railways, and if you're running a minimum service, you're pushing people to have overcrowded trains. That has an impact on everybody who's using those train services. Now, the government want to run a 40% service. That's of all services. It's not a skeleton service, it's all services. To do that, you need to use 60 to 70% of your workforce. So in doing that, you're removing the right to strike from balloted members. People have balloted for strike action, and you're removing that right to strike. This is going to have an impact in the workforce. There's no way of knowing how the companies are going to decide who has to come in, who doesn't have to come in, which is going to have an impact on morale as well. But the main thing is, it's in our industry, the bill that they're trying to put on us is unworkable. To put a rostered timetable in place in 7 days is just not going to happen. It takes months to structure a timetable. So the plans that they're doing just won't work. The rail delivery group don't want that. The companies don't want that because they know that it's unworkable. So.
Brilliant, thanks Dawn, and I think you've set out really powerfully, as our whole panel has, why this legislation is unworkable as well as undemocratic and unfair. Can you join me in giving a massive thanks to our panel, and I'll hand back to the President.
Right, Congress. Just allow our panellists to get off the stage. Thank you very much. It's been quite a first year of office for the TUC General Secretary to my left. A wave of industrial action and an abhorrent government determined to silence workers and weaken our unions. Paul, I now invite you to address Congress.
Over the last year, I have stood on dozens of picket lines with thousands of workers. Decent people, hard-working people, people like you, like me, like millions of other working people out there up and down the country, forced to take strike action to get a decent pay rise, to pay the bills, to make ends meet. And I want to start this special Congress with a message to each and every one of those workers. To the physios at St Thomas's, the paramedics in Liverpool, Newcastle and Lewisham, the rail workers at King's Cross, Lime Street and Piccadilly, the university lecturers, civil servants, teachers. Today, this movement resolves we will fight to defend your right to strike. Delegates, welcome to Congress House, the home of the trade union movement. This is a place where generations of trade unionists have gathered, not just to pass resolutions or debate points of law, but to set out in concrete terms what we can do to stand for working people. And here we are once again facing yet another set of laws designed to silence the voices of workers. The Strikes Act could, put simply, take away the right to strike from 5.5 million people, 1 in 5 British workers. It's unfair, it's undemocratic, Congress, it is unfit to be on the statute book. The right to strike, to withdraw your labour, is a cornerstone of our democracy, of any democracy. No one wants to go on strike. It's something you're forced to do when your boss threatens your job, or your safety at work, or won't give you a decent pay rise. Going on strike is a basic protection that working people have relied on for generations. But today, we've got a Tory government that feels threatened by that basic protection. Threatened by the organised working class, threatened by workers having the temerity to stand up. And their response? Reach out for that old Thatcherite playbook, slap more restrictions on unions, bully working people into keeping quiet. Congress, let us be clear, we won't be quiet, we won't be bullied, and we won't be intimidated by this government. We're here today because successive Conservative governments made our public services pick up the bill for the bankers' crash. We're here today because they promised to build back better after the pandemic, and then they stood by while millions suffered through a cost of living crisis. And we are here today because just last year, this Tory government crashed our economy and then told us it was the fault of workers wanting a pay rise. Congress, no more lies, no more excuses, no more scapegoats. It's time for the Prime Minister to take responsibility, time for him to stand down, and time to call a general election. Now, in this movement, everything we do is built on solidarity. Standing together is the only way we win. So let me be clear. I expect, you expect, an incoming Labour government to repeal this spiteful legislation. That's what the leader and the deputy leader have said in private and in public. Yeah. But we can't just wait for an election. We have to decide what we're doing as a movement right now to fight this legislation. Now, you wouldn't expect me to talk tactics here in public, where ministers and employers and their lawyers can hear, so I won't. But I will tell you this. If they come for one worker, if they come for one union, they will face us all. Yeah. As a young trade union activist, one of the first things I learned was that you don't cross a picket line. And no matter what laws they pass or how they threaten us, this movement is not in the business of telling any worker to cross a picket line. Now, as I said earlier, this year I have had the privilege of standing alongside thousands of workers all over the UK. I actually found myself standing on a picket line at my old secondary school with my former history teacher, proud NEU member, Mr. McKibben. But tell you what, not one of the workers I talked to was glib about taking strike action. Not least the clinical support workers I met on the Wirral. 700 of them, mainly women. Clinical support workers, they take your blood, they monitor your heart rate, they test your urine. Crucial work. NHS Band 3 work, but for years paid as Band 2. They went on strike to end years of underpayment, and they won. But something happened one of those days on the picket line. Nearby, on the M53, there was a fatal coach crash. 2 people tragically died. And as one, those clinical support workers decided to leave the picket line because they knew they might be needed. Their first concern, their overriding concern, their only concern was keeping people safe. None of those workers need a lesson in public safety from Conservative ministers. Firefighters, ambulance crew, nurses, rail staff, clinical support workers on the Wirral and all over the country. They're the ones who know about public safety. They're the ones who care about public safety, and they're the ones who keep the public safe. That's their job. That's their vocation. And when they're needed, it's trade union members, not ministers in Whitehall, who run to help. So I say this to the Tory government. If you don't want strikes, you know what to do. Pay us fairly. Treat us fairly. Invest in our public services and fix the mess that you've created. So Congress, here today, let's resolve. We will defy their ban on strikes. We will overturn this unjust law, and we will win for workers. Solidarity, Congress. Thanks, Congress. Let's have a fantastic day, Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for that. We'll now hear from our second panel of workers who are set to be affected by the legislation. Let's start again by welcoming them to Congress. And again, I will hand over to Kate Bell, Assistant General Secretary, to introduce the panel.
Thanks, President, and it's time to hear again. We've got another really fantastic set of workers who also are going to be hit by the government's unfair minimum service level bill. So, Sam, I'm going to ask you to kick us off. Sam Collins-Berry is a paramedic. He's Unison's ambulance service convener for Cheshire and Merseyside. And Sam, you took strike action last year. Tell us a bit about the cover arrangements you put in place.
Good morning. Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Congress, for having us here today. So I took strike action last year during the NHS dispute. My branch had not taken strike action since the Trade Union Act was passed in 2016. But in the midst of a cost of living crisis, we overwhelmingly voted to take strike action for better pay and conditions and patient safety in the NHS. One of the reasons I don't support introducing minimum service levels is because we already go above and beyond to provide emergency cover on strike days. Last year, I was heavily involved in the emergency cover planning in my branch. We executed a plan which maintained emergency cover on our strike days. We encouraged striking colleagues to attend the picket lines and asked them if they were willing to attend to patients in emergencies. We stationed experienced reps in the control rooms in case emergencies came in, and if the call volumes got too high, we asked striking call handlers and paramedics and technicians to respond to our most unwell patients from the picket lines. We went to great lengths to ensure that ambulances got to those who needed them on any strike day. We do this because we care. We are there to protect and to serve the public. That's why we work in the NHS. We were successful as well. There were no patient incidents on our strike days. We were also successful because during our patient protecting strike action, we won a higher pay rise and a one-off bonus last year. Minimum service levels in the ambulance service are not required and they are totally unnecessary. We already work with employers locally in great length to ensure emergency ambulance cover. I wish there was minimum service levels in the NHS on non-strike days. I wish the government provided enough employees sufficient funding and improved recruitment and retention of staff on non-strike days. These are the issues we are seeking to address when we take strike action. The pay rise we won last year will hopefully result in fewer NHS workers leaving their jobs this year. This is why I'm opposed to minimum strike levels. They'll create more problems than they solve. They restrict our rights to strike. Therefore, for better pay, better working conditions and a better quality NHS. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam, and a really clear explanation of why we have to fight this legislation. So let's hear from Ava next. Ava Verrier is a primary school teacher in Birmingham, a member of NASUWT. Ava, tell us why the right to strike is so important in education.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the education profession is already experiencing minimum service levels. Services have been paid to the bone, and education is in crisis. The government has yet again failed to achieve their targets for teacher recruitment, with many employers finding it increasingly difficult to recruit to the profession. We've seen record numbers of teaching staff saying they've considered leaving the teaching profession in the last year, and this bill is not going to address the crisis in education, and it's not going to attract anybody into the profession. Teachers don't want to go on strike. We want to be in the classroom, we want to be working with our children, but we want to work in workplaces that are safe, with no health and safety issues, and where we're free from harassment and discrimination, and with manageable workloads and earning a salary that reflects our profession. And sometimes we have to strike to achieve this. Teachers work in communities where with some of the most disadvantaged and vulnerable families, and this bill will just this bill has the potential to create significant damage in the relationship between schools and parents. The bill's not going to, Amanda Spielman has spoken about the social contract, and this bill isn't going to help to solve that. It's going to undo all the valuable work that teachers and schools have invested and create a rift between schools and parents. And teachers want to continue to be valued by parents and the communities we work in. Sorry, I've just got one last little bit, sorry. Just put plainly, the bill's awful, isn't it? It's from an awful government with no consideration for anyone but themselves. The bill is unworkable. It's unworkable in education. Who decides which teacher is going to go on strike? Is it going to be the local authority, the CEO, the head teacher? If it's the head teacher that has it can actually put the head teacher at a disadvantage and in a very vulnerable position. The bill will not resolve a dispute. If anything, it will actually make it more protracted. And the bill is intended to pit worker against worker, union against union, and be no doubt that is the outcome that this Tory government want, and they're hell-bent on achieving it, and they're expecting the trade union movement to do their dirty work for them, and we're not going to do it.
Brilliant, Ava. I think you can hear the response in the hall to that. Let's bring in Jim. Jim Buchanan's a train driver, president of the regional council of his union RMT. Jim, you can tell us a bit about the RMT's disputes.
Yeah, thanks very much. Neither of those things are true, by the way. I'm actually a train guard from Bournemouth.
Sorry, Jim.
And I'm not president.
That's what the notes say.
I chair the Dorset Rail branch, but you honour me way beyond my accomplishments, but thank you anyway. Yeah, I can't think of a time when I ain't been involved in a dispute. So, over the last 6 years, I've been involved in one dispute or another, taken almost 100 days of strike action. By the way, both of those disputes could have been resolved without DfT and government interference. So perhaps the government would be much better investing their time in keeping their beaks out of industrial relations. And they put their beak into industrial relations because they think they can generate political capital from them. In the process, demonise good, honest, working people in their quest to invent enemies. Now, ultimately, we beat those thresholds time and time again and won settlements. And that's the rub here, isn't it? It's not because we're downtrodden, weak union members. It's because we're bloody effective at what we do. And when we are effective, the ruling class respond as they've always responded. When we start winning and getting good at their game, They change the rules and they take the ball away. And why do they do that? It's because they've got an ideological hatred and fear of organised labour and working class solidarity. So what they're going to do is legislate against us, criminalise good, decent people. MSL will be divisive. It's designed to foment division, envy amongst our people, and financial and moral devastation. This is pernicious, delegated legislation that the employer does not want. And I can tell you that. I meet with the directors and they don't want this either. So we've got to put pressure on them. But of course, the danger on the railway, if they don't do what the government want, then they'll turn the taxpayer-funded tap off. Now, speaking for my union, we're not victims. The RMT doesn't do victims. The RMT does activism. The RMT does organisation. And the RMT does participatory democracy. And this legislation ain't fair. Well, life ain't fair. But it's going to be a big ask. It's going to be a big ask for that first member, whether they're us or ASLEF, who's given a work notice, to martyr themselves. So we're going to need the support of the movement. But we're also going to need to box a bit clever. And in my view, we're going to need to have a slightly more sophisticated approach that may not already be contained within here. Because I tell you now, if one of my people comes to me and says, Jim, I'm under so much mental pressure because of emotional bullying, emotional coercion, and emotional harassment, I would have to ask them, are you fit for duty? And the answer is, probably not, because you've got the safety of the public in mind. And if you want to withhold our green gauges, then do it, because that's what I voted for in the first place. Now, finally, what I would say to you all, brothers and sisters, if we're talking about minimum levels, minimum service in public duty, let's have a minimum threshold down there in the House of Commons. Let's have a minimum threshold in the House of Lords, because I've got an MP down in Poole called Robert Sims, and we see more of Halley's Comet than we do that clown in the last 10 years in Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for setting me right. Thanks for setting the government right. So, Matt, it would be great to hear from you. Matt Church is, I think, a junior doctor working in a hospital in Manchester and a member of the HCSA. So, Matt, tell us about the junior doctors' strike and how MSLs could affect the NHS.
Yeah, that's correct. Junior doctors, any doctor doesn't want to be on strike. That's not why we did 5 years of medical school. We'd rather be treating our patients in hospitals across the country. But we've been forced into strike action because the government aren't listening to what we're saying about the real terms pay cut we've had of around a third and what the implications of that are, the exodus of staff from the health service. I think overall in the NHS, about 170,000 people left last year, a 25% increase from the year before that. Recruitment and retention is in crisis because of the pay and conditions within the NHS. I think 1 in 10 vacancies are vacant in the NHS at the minute. We're doing our 8th round of strike action in less than 2 weeks. We don't want to be there, but we're doing it because we're forced into it. In terms of the MSLs, I genuinely think it'll be unworkable within the health service. We could walk down the streets in London and we could walk into an A&E and we'd see unsafe staffing levels. The amount of demand on the NHS is increasing year on year, and as we've been saying, the staffing isn't there for it. If the MSLs are set in place, would that apply to the normal days? I've been called at 10 p.m. at night asking to cover a night shift because there's not enough staff in the hospital and they've asked me to cover it. Our doctors have been on shifts where there's gaps and it's unsafe. Will that apply for the normal days as well? And it's the admin as well involved in the MSL. Every hospital trust will have to define a service level, speak to their unions. That's a lot of red tape. It's a lot of bureaucracy. I thought Brexit was about trying to remove all that, and this government are pushing this service levels to do that, and I don't see how it will work in real terms.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Matt, reminding us this legislation is unworkable as well as unfair. I'm going to turn to Izzy next. Izzy is a firefighter and a rep for the FBU. Izzy.
Brilliant. Thank you. So just as a bit of context, since leaving training school about 2.5 years ago, I've spent my career based at an extremely busy city centre fire station. I was fortunate enough to be placed with a very established crew who have themselves taken strike action through several different disputes, such as paying pensions. So last year, we were offered a pathetic, not even pathetic, just outright insulting 2% pay increase, whilst prices were skyrocketing. The work we do as firefighters is dangerous. Every day, we are potentially going out and putting our lives at risk, yet we're only worth 2%. I know firefighters that have had to resort to food banks to be able to just put food on the table for their families. We did everything we could in West Mids and across the country, for that matter, to get as high turnout for vote action, to vote for strike action as possible, to show that we are worth more than the 2%. And we did it. We smashed the Tory ballot thresholds. So, as a result, we rejected the 2%. So they took that and they came back with 5%, but we still know we were worth more. And as a result, we finally agreed on an offer that put substantially more money in the pockets of hard-working firefighters. So this is why we need to be clear that the Minimum Services Levels Act is the worst piece of anti-union legislation the Tories have ever tried to introduce. Because for firefighters in our industry, the minimum services levels could become an effective ban on strike action. The government is considering setting a service level as high as 90%, which, let's be honest, that is a strike ban. Firefighters ride 5 on a fire engine. The vast majority of firefighters are FBU members, so all 5 firefighters could potentially vote for strike action. So that means under the new proposals, 4 of those 5 firefighters could be served a work notice, leaving only 1 firefighter to strike when we all voted. Or, for example, take our control staff. At times, we only have 3 people in a control room. Under this legislation, it means those workers can never take strike action. So this is a travesty for democracy. As firefighters, we never take strike action without serious deliberation about the consequences. But faced with employers making damaging cuts or putting the public safety at risk or cutting our pay and pensions, sometimes we have to strike. At present, the FBU have active disputes across the country. If our members decide to vote for strike action, they're facing having their hands tied. So we cannot just wait for lawyers or the next Labour government to bin these laws. That's why the TUC and every affiliated union needs to organise a vibrant, active, visible campaign on this issue. We need to mobilise our members into activity. Now we need a national demonstration, not just for, but all firefighters, because we insist our employers refuse to impose work notices. We have to fight. We cannot and will not accept being held down like this. For firefighters across the country, we have no alternative.
Brilliant. Thanks, Izzy, and making it so clear once again that these are the people who are keeping the country safe. So, finally, Diana, we'd really love to hear from you now. Diana's assistant head teacher in a primary school and an NAHT member, and now has the mic.
Thank you. So MSLs for us in terms of education are yet another attempt by government to silence a band of core professionals and workers without whom the country simply would not run. Their draconian attempt at a put up and shut up approach will not stand with us. It reinforces their utter disdain for our profession and the professions that we see here united today. Unions, by their very nature, are a collective voice for change for the people and by the people. It is reprehensible that government have even contemplated this in today's day and age. In education, we do not want to deny children their right to a good quality education under the UNCRC. However, we are also entitled to our right to strike. It is a clear message from government that change is needed for the workers, by the workers. Strike action sends that clear message. Having received the mandate from school leaders back in the summer, government were clearly ruffled. Introducing MSLs would be akin to removing a school council, taking away pupil voice in a school where we want to hear from them. It's interesting, isn't it, that in a statutory way in schools, we are taught to teach the children British values, of which there are individual liberty and democracy. And yet this government are taking away exactly that from us with the MSLs, removing the democratic process, taking it out of our hands and putting it in the hands of puppeteers that hold the strings. This would mean relations between education and government would be completely destroyed, having already been, if you like, gone to an all-time low over the past few years. The attrition of the credibility of our profession over the last 13 years proves that the education sector is no longer respected or valued by government. Introducing MSLs will damage this beyond repair. We have been relentlessly reasonable, steadfast in our commitment to the children and communities we serve. There should always be a mechanism in place for collective voice to call for change and for strike action as a last resort where government are failing key stakeholders. From an equality point of view, I sit looking around here at the faces that are with us today. We know that in education, many of our leaders are of an older generation, if you like, unproportionately disadvantaging them should these MSLs be put into place. Equally, there are more women in education, again, unfairly disadvantaged with the MSLs. I seem to remember an Equality Act of 2010, don't you? With 9 protected characteristics that our government are failing to protect and also not valuing the British values that we are taught to teach in our schools. Colleagues, MSLs are draconian. They are unworkable and they have no place in today's society.
Thank you so much, Diana, and I don't think I can put it better than that. We've heard from 11 amazing trade unionists, but they're representing 5.5 million workers who could have their right to strike taken away. I want you to join me in thanking the panellists and moving on to the debate about how we fight this unfair, draconian law. Thank you.
Well, thank you to Kate and to all the panellists in both sessions for those fantastic contributions. Congress delegates have received a copy of the General Council statement, which we're now about to debate. I will invite Paddy Lillis to move the statement and Christina McInerney to second. Unions have been asked to notify us in advance of speakers who wish to contribute to the debate. It's my intention to take all speakers, and while I know these are hugely important and emotive issues, I would encourage speakers to please stick to time as far as possible. That's 3 minutes for all speakers other than the mover. I will then ask Paul to respond to the debate. So I now call Paddy Lillis, General Counsel Lead on Employment Rights, to move the statement on behalf of the General Counsel.
President of Congress, Paddy Lillis on behalf of the General Counsel, moving the statement on minimal service levels. Congress, this statement outlines the General Counsel's proposals for a clear, comprehensive and decisive response from the trade union movement to the Tory government's latest vicious attack on workers' rights. Colleagues, it follows on from the position we agreed in Congress in September. Then we agreed to build a mass opposition to minimum service levels. We resolved to use all means necessary to oppose them, and we reaffirmed our solidarity with any trade union attacked by them. Through this statement, we have expanded on those commitments with a detailed plan. A plan to support our movement to challenge these restrictions, to make sure that every union member in every workplace has the support they need when their rights are under threat. A plan to resist this unjustifiable attack on our right to strike. And we will keep on fighting back in the courts, both at home and internationally. In the workplace, we will stand up against work notices calling on employers to reject them, but if they are imposed, we will resist them. Congress, every dispute is different, and there will be no one-size-fits-all response. Unions will make their own decisions led by their members in democratic processes on how they fight back. But make no mistake, any member threatened with the work notice will feel the collective strength of the trade union movement, representing 5.5 million workers, standing with them in solidarity and support, and unions will work together to deploy the most effective tactics possible. This statement sets out just some of the grounds that we will challenge the minimum service levels on: public safety, worker safety, data protection, contractual agreements and equalities. Congress, the statement is also a plan to mobilise our movement in opposition. We'll march alongside the SAC GCHQ workers in Cheltenham on the 27th of January, and we will march again if and when a work notice is deployed, and we will campaign together relentlessly to make the case against minimum service levels in the strongest possible terms, and we will make it at every opportunity. Congress, whatever the government might say, we know that these laws have not been introduced to protect public services. We know that these laws have been introduced to attack the trade union movement, our movement, creating unworkable, draconian and entirely unnecessary red tape to weaken us, to damage us and to determine and undermine our members' fundamental rights. So while we continue to fight for them to be repealed, we'll have a very welcome and solid commitment from the Labour Party to do just that. In the meantime, we can expect the government to use these laws to attack our members and our movement. So we must stand ready, and this statement makes it clear that the TUC will act swiftly when our affiliates are under attack. We will look at all the options for support, whether financially, politically, industrially, practical or legal. We will make these decisions collectively through our TUC structures. Our solidarity will not be weakened, and we will never allow this Tory government to divide working people. Congress, today and every day, the entire trade union movement must stand together. We must stand together to protect the right to strike. We must stand together for all workers, and we must stand together against this unnecessary, vindictive, unworkable legislation. Congress, please support this General Council statement. I move. Thank you.
Thank you, Paddy. I now call Christina McAnee from Unison, Chair of the Public Services Liaison Group, to second the statement. Christina.
Good morning, Congress. Christina McAnee from Unison. Very proud to second this statement and commit the General Council and my union to fighting this wherever we can and in every level. This is a clear attack, as we've heard, on the right to strike. And that lot in Westminster, they have a history now, haven't they, of introducing unworkable laws, laws that are just done as a knee-jerk reaction. There's been no thought through it. They haven't consulted anyone, and then most of them are probably going to be unworkable. And this is precisely what this law is. It will be unworkable. It's not necessary. Nobody wants it, and nobody needs it. It's purely punitive against trade unions and working people. Because the right to withdraw our strike, our labour, is a fundamental human right. We're not serfs. Working people aren't serfs. We're not indentured labour. We have the right to say, I don't like what my employer's doing. I think this is putting people at risk. I don't think they're paying me properly for the job that I do. And we have the right to say, I will now withdraw my labour until you come back and talk to us and we get a settlement that's acceptable to everyone. That is what the right to strike is all about. And removing that takes away individuals' right to say, I matter. What I do matters. And I'll tell you what, Congress, let's not make that happen on our watch. And I know from the strikes that took place earlier this year that my union was involved in, and you heard from Sam from our union, you heard from the fantastic panel, what that actually meant in practice, going on strike. And for them, particularly in our health service membership and in our ambulance membership, they spent weeks working with their employers to come up with safe plans to make sure the public were not put at risk. I visited loads of our picket lines during the strike days, and there wasn't a single ambulance picket line I visited where people didn't come off the picket line, get into an ambulance and go out there and deal with public and make sure that there was safety maintained. And these are the same people who during COVID were turning up to go in and look after the public. Ambulance workers, health workers, people in schools, people in shops, people in all sorts of organisations. They were the ones that were still out there delivering essential services before we even knew there would be a vaccine. They were putting their lives at risk, and they're the very first ones this Tory government is coming after. I'm really pleased that this statement makes clear our commitment to support any union, any group of workers affected by this. So the first ones affected by it, we will mobilise to make sure we give them total support. Because it's critical we don't let this government pick us off one by one or union by union. And remember, employers don't want this. Employers don't need this. The country doesn't need this. The public support us, so when we take strike action and we explain why we are doing this, we get fantastic support from the public. This is not something they have called for. It's unnecessary, it's unworkable. And I hope when you read the statement, you will see that we're planning a national demonstration on the 27th of January in Cheltenham. In my union, we've already started the work to try and get as good a turnout as possible. In Congress, it is possible to have a national dispute outside of the M25, and it can still be successful, so please work towards it. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Okay, I will now call other speakers, of which we have quite a number. I'll let unions know when they are to be called. I will call you in batches. If speakers could come to the chairs at the front when I call your union, that would be appreciated. And I'll call other batches of speakers as we proceed with the debate. So, first of all, if I could invite Unite, the NEU, the RCM and GMB, please, to move to the front, and Unite, please, to speak.
Thank you, Sharon Graham, Unite. Friends, let's be really clear what this is about. This is about the right to strike. This government wants to stop workers putting a stake in the ground, to stop workers defending their jobs, their pay and their conditions, like we have done for over 100 years. And make no mistake, this legislation puts this government at war with workers. And friends, we know that politicians very, very rarely lead the fight. It wasn't politicians who gave us the Equal Pay Act. It was striking women workers at Ford Dagenham. It wasn't politicians who gave us the Race Relations Act. It was the action of the Bristol bus boycott workers. And it certainly hasn't been any politicians who've been driving up pay today. It's organised labour, the working class, through strike and struggle. We know that, and they certainly know that. In my own union, in the last 2 years, we have led over 1,000 disputes, putting £420 million back into the pockets of workers. So today, let's pay tribute from this hall to all of those striking workers across all our unions who have stood on the shoulders of giants, all reps, all our members who fight for progress. We stand with you. Thank you for your bravery. Thank you for taking a stand. Solidarity to you all. And conference, the easy part of today will be agreeing the statement. That will be the easy part. because the hard part is going to be pushing back these attacks. The real decision will be the decision to act. We must not allow them to force workers across their own picket lines, to break their own strikes, to defeat their own resolve. And in order for us to stop this happening, all of us, my union included, must be prepared to ask ourselves some very difficult questions. What does a real strategy for non-compliance look like? What are we really prepared to do? And will we help others when they need it? Because, friends, one of us in this room, one group of our members in this room will be first. They will be tested. We must act together. And, friends, we have to face facts. Real solidarity to push this back may take us outside the law. And as it was said in 1921, it is better to break the law than break the poor. And friends, when the law itself is unlawful, we should show from our strength, find our inspiration, turn rhetoric into something real. Because we certainly just can't wait for Labour. Certainly not when they're channeling Margaret Thatcher for inspiration. Or just turn to lawyers. Because the fight is going to be right now. It will be what we do that counts, not the judges, not the politicians, what we do as a trade union movement. And to me, that is the crux of where we are. Are we up for this fight? Because if we are, we're going to have to box clever. We're going to have to use our brains and our brawn. We're going to have to develop strike funds and think about who the critical workers are. Coordinate our action inside and outside the workplace. Who are the real decision makers? Are they in Derby or are they in Detroit? Follow the money. Friends, no matter what happens, Unite will be preparing for every eventuality. We have already changed our rule book to give us the option to work outside the law if necessary. Whatever this government comes up with, we are going to try and block them. And their recent threat to tax our strike pay, I can tell them this. If you tax our strike pay, we will add the tax on. Friends, this fight is a worthy one. The hand of history is on our shoulders. Dignity does not come by us being on our knees. So let's lift up our heads as well as our banners. Let's face this government down. Let's rise up together and defend workers with everything we have. I'll see you on the picket line. Solidarity.
Thanks, Sharon. I call the NEU.
Congress, Daniel Kebede, National Education Union. Look, over the last 13 years, we have all witnessed the decline in education. So a minimum service level in education is something every teacher, every leader and support staff colleague dreams of. For every NEU member dreams of an education system where every child is taught by a qualified teacher, where every child is taught by a subject specialist. Our profession dreams of class sizes smaller than 30, where every child has access to the special needs support that they need. A minimum service level should be a contract between this government and our children that allows every child to be educated in a fully funded, well-resourced school free from crumbling concrete, where every child has a free, warm, nourishing lunch and lives a life free from the crushing, life-limiting burden of poverty. Yet instead of prioritising our young people, instead of investing in them, we have a failed Prime Minister, a Prime Minister who has never faced the public to seek a democratic mandate, prioritising the greatest attack on our democratic freedoms in our lifetime. Now, Gillian Keegan too has been open about the rationale. Too many days lost last year to strike action. Strikes, days that they never thought that we would be able to mount or sustain. A union of 500,000 members breaking this government's anti-democratic strike thresholds not once but twice. But these were days of action that could have been avoided, days that would never have happened had this government pulled its head out of the sand to deal with our concerns. This government, tough on strikes, but does nothing to address the fruitless funding, rocketing workloads, or plummeting pay that lead to them. The reality is this is not about the protection of services. It is about the protection of this ruthless government's ability to underfund our services. The government's intention of 74% of children in schools on a strike day, every child in an exam year, every child with an EHCP, every child of a key worker, every child in a primary setting will require 100% of the staff team. The chilling reality being the complete outlawing of strike action in education. But to paraphrase MLK, if we lived in China or Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe we could understand some of this illegal legislation. Maybe we could understand the denial of certain basic democratic freedoms because they hadn't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read about the freedom of association. Somewhere I read about the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read about the freedom of speech. And just so as we said, we weren't going to let anti-democratic strike thresholds turn us around. We are not going to let minimum service levels turn around. This government really needs to understand that restrictions on the right to strike coinciding with the continued decline in education will only deepen the resentment, deepen the anger, and deepen our resolve. And that anger, that resentment, and that resolve remains. Because since the 1st of September, the NEU has been forced to sanction a record number of workplace disputes. Since the 1st of September, we have begun a trajectory that will lead us to training a record number of reps this academic year. The NEU, a union of 500,000 teachers, school leaders and support staff, will not stand idly by whilst this government limits the life chances of our children, a government bereft of a moral compass. Our response to this legislation will be to deepen industrial action. And whilst the arc of the moral universe might be long, it bends towards justice.
Thanks. Thanks, Daniel. I call the RCM.
President and Congress, I'm Jo Walton. I'm the General Secretary of the Royal College of Midwives, a very proud midwife. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support. This is our contribution to this debate with a focus on points 1, 6, 9 of the General Council statement. I want to begin by expressing our absolute indignation at the suggestion that midwives and maternity support workers would take strike action that endangers the safety of women and babies. That couldn't be further from the minds of our members, and how dare this government suggest this? When we have taken strike action, for example, in England in 2014 and this year in Northern Ireland, we absolutely ensured that safety was never compromised. Local reps worked with managers to agree derogations to ensure no women or babies had their care compromised. I was on that picket line in Northern Ireland and I saw midwives returning to the labour ward to care for women. Our right to strike is accepted by a regulatory body, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and members operate within their code of conduct. Striking midwives responded if emergency rose, acting with a professionalism and integrity. So I can confirm that our tactical approach to non-compliance will be, in the event that we authorise industrial action in the future, we will continue with our existing practice of negotiating derogations at a local level, ensuring our members comply with their professional codes and reassuring families receiving maternity care that their safety is always paramount. Local voluntary delegations work. Local trade unions working with local managers, it works. There is no need for central government to ham-fistedly control from Whitehall. Indeed, it would be a far better use of government's time and focus to deliver on improving midwife numbers so that care is better and safer every single day. Not just those on those rare, exceptional days when midwives are driven to take industrial action. The irony is not lost on me that for safety of maternity services, we're probably better staffed on strike days than on non-strike days. Congress, the NHS in England is still short of 2,500 midwives, with midwives working at least 100,000 extra hours a week, unrecorded and unpaid, keeping women and babies safe. So perhaps this government's fixation with minimum service levels would also be better spent investing in our maternity services so that families could be guaranteed minimum safe service levels to allow them to have choice of places of birth and staffing levels that make them feel safe across their whole care. Our second focus will be the work with other NHS trade unions, both at national and local level, to call on NHS employers to reject this approach to managing industrial action and to continue to work with us to develop safe solutions. We have always done. We know many employers have already committed to this, and we will push for more. Finally, we want to highlight that the development of this legislation fails to consider the impact on equality. For the consultation and MSLs in the NHS, no equality impact assessment is published. With a midwifery workforce where women make up 99.7%, there is an argument, therefore, that MSLs applying to hospital sector will have a disproportionate effect on women. So in summary, we add our support to the TUC campaign against minimum service levels. We will continue to ensure that if and when our members exercise their right to strike, they will do so with professionalism and integrity. And they have always shown that, and we will seek to bargain away this divisive legislation with the employers we work with. Finally, midwives are fabulous. On my way here this morning, I heard my daughter had given birth to my grandson.
And there's a big congratulations there on that, Jill. Before I ask Barbara to speak, could I ask the NASUWT, ASLEV and PCS to make their way to the chairs at the front. GMB, please.
President, Congress, Barbara Plant, GMB President. I stand here as a proud public sector worker. This wretched government has run out of road. They are responsible for the degradation of our public services, not the workers. The Tories think that this despicable attack on workers' rights will be easy pickings to help them limp into the next general election. But they are attacking the very people they need to keep our country running. Congress, we are not a threat to the safety net. We are the safety net. For 13 years, we had cuts, pay freezes, and threats to our pensions. And when we dare to ask for a pay rise, they attack us with punitive legislation to practically ban our right to strike. Our members want nothing more than properly staffed departments and quality services. Members in the ambulance service will tell you that it's not strikes that threaten patient safety, it's years of underfunding and rising demand. In fact, official figures show that thanks to the unions, delays actually fell during national ambulance strike days. And just this week, the Tories admitted to the GMB that the regulations were not based on service levels that were precise or calculated based on a proper model. Our rights are under threat in nuclear decommissioning, where our members work every day to keep the public safe. And in schools, Ministers can't even come up with a ratio due to chronic support staff shortages. School support staff are among the lowest paid in the country. Perhaps if they were paid better, they wouldn't have to resort to potentially taking strike action. And for this reason, GMB believes that the next Labour government must implement trade union access rights to all workplaces, ensure electronic balloting, negotiate decent pay awards, and repeal all anti-trade union legislation. The Tories have lost all sense of reality, willfully or not, when it comes to our public services. But trade union members cannot be the scapegoats for their abject failure. We must defeat this legislation, and we must be united in doing so. Congress, solidarity with workers in the NHS, schools, nuclear decommissioning, transport, border security and beyond. Let's fight for our rights. Please support.
Thank you, Barbara. And I have to say you were spot on time. And I have been slightly lenient with that, but I would urge people to... There is a set of lights up there, and I urge people to try and pay attention to that. Thanks, Barbara. OK, NASUWT, please.
OK, President, Congress, Rashid Zinn, NASUWT, the Teachers' Union, speaking strongly in support of the General Council statement. Congress, the NASUWT stands united with the entire trade union movement in campaigning to defeat the Strike Act, using all means at our disposal. Give us justice or we will fight. This was a rallying call to our union's formation in 1919. Ordinary teachers doing extraordinary things. Nothing has changed. We are a room full of ordinary workers and we will do extraordinary things. This Tory government is waging war on trade union members, working people. They're attacking our teachers and support staff instead of delivering the investment needed for our children. On our watch, we've had year-on-year real-term cuts to their schools and college budgets, waiting lists for children's mental health support rising to record levels, cuts to support for pupils with special educational needs. This is really close to my heart as a serving teacher, working with the most vulnerable young people for over 25 years. School buildings at serious risk of collapse, hundreds and thousands of children missing from education. As a result, teacher shortages everywhere. The worst teacher recruitment and retention crisis in half a century. Teachers like me, we did not cause this crisis. Cracks in our ceiling and cracks in our education system. This is a crisis made by the Tories in Westminster who have failed our children. And if this government generally wants to protect the right to education, I'll tell you what, reverse the 13 years of chronic underfunding, invest in the workforce, pack up and call for a general election. Rishi Sunak, if I had to grade your government, you failed. And Keir, I'm sorry, but you're heading towards that way. Thatcher, please. No, no, no. Congress, there are those who will say that our campaign of resistance is about law-breaking by trade unions. But I say this, our movement is built on resistance. Give us justice or we will fight. No anti-trade union laws will ever stop us from taking action to protect our members' rights. We defeated their anti-union ballot threshold when our members voted for industrial action. We defeated their unlawful strike-breaking agency worker regulations. And we will defeat them again. Congress, when we fight, we win. In solidarity, I support.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Congress. Mick Whelan, Aslef. May I bring you solidarity from the 16 disputes we had this week. 16 disputes that show minimum service levels will not work. We have the ability within this room, we have the tactics, we have the knowledge of our industries to show these people they cannot take away our rights, and they won't. I keep reading these bits of paper about trade unions and workers holding the country to ransom. Last time I looked, we were the millions, we were the country, and we were looking after each other. And if they want to take us on, let them, because we will win and we will prevail. Because they don't understand. Ever since Thatcher's Society of Individuals, it's never happened. Why don't we deal with the real issues? Why don't we deal with 13 years of economic ineptitude? Why don't we deal with 13 years of austerity? Why don't we deal with the decimation of our public services, our councils and the budgets? Why don't we recognise that we are the first generation to leave the next generation worse off in history? Why aren't we changing our world for the better? Because this isn't the government that's going to do it. The people that are going to do it are in this room. And they will do it by standing together, protecting what they fought for in the past. The rights that we should have enshrined. The rights that are ours to take away our labour when we see it. And if we don't do it together, they will pick us off one by one. As previous speakers have said, they tried to demonise us and split us, and that has failed. They tried to take away our sense of community, but I look around this room, and I don't think there's a trade union where I haven't been on a picket line or on a stage with somewhere supporting their right to strike, supporting their claims for a better world, or their claims to the workers that they look after. And no one else is going to do it for us. But also, it's a changing world, a changing narrative. I'm not really keen on that word. But let's look at it. I come from a union that traditionally has no public approval when we go on strike. There isn't a household in this country that hasn't been impacted by what this government has done, that hasn't had a teacher or a civil servant or someone in the NHS or someone in private or public sector that's been on strike or is impacted by the vile legislation, not just MSL, that's been brought in by this government. They condemn P&O and then try to bring in agency workers, and we beat them in the courts. We will not only campaign for our right to strike, we will campaign for every other bit of legislation that they put in the last 30 years, repeal the lot, fight for a better future, fight for ourselves, and fight for future generations, because we don't do this for ourselves. We do it for the future of our children, our grandchildren, and a working class movement that deserves respect and deserves support. Keep fighting. Solidarity.
Thanks, Mick. Before PCS, could I ask the EIS, RMT and UCU to come to the seats at the front, please. PCS.
Chair Congress, Fran Heathcote from PCS. 40 years ago, 14 civil servants working in GCHQ lost their jobs. The reason? For being a member of a trade union. Margaret Thatcher enforced a ban on trade union membership in 1984, but 14 brave workers stood firm and refused to relinquish this fundamental human right. Their defiance cost them their jobs, and what followed was one of the longest and most high-profile disputes in our movement's history. After 10 years of campaigning across the trade union movement, led by the late Mike Grinley, the ban was finally lifted in 1997. And I'm immensely proud that the GCHQ branch remains an important part of PCS right to this day. That such a campaign was needed to protect a basic right is shameful. And Congress, 4 decades on, here we are again, a rotten Tory government taking a sledgehammer to our members' rights. It's an unprecedented assault, and we've got to fight it with everything that we've got. Despite what government ministers may say, this legislation has nothing to do with preventing disruption or protecting the services that the public relies on. Just one look at our crumbling schools, overstretched NHS and broken rail system puts paid to any notion that this government has the best interest of the public at heart. This legislation is about one thing and one thing only, restricting the right to strike and our members' ability to fight back against low pay and bad bosses. If they were serious about heading off strike action, they could start by giving our members a fair pay rise. But I'm not holding my breath, and neither are PCS members in the border force. Instead, they're bracing themselves for what are some of the most severe restrictions of the lot, as you may have heard from Pete during the panel discussion this morning. Strikes are now required to have no impact on strike days, which for all intents and purposes is an outright ban on strike action. And the government has said itself that 3 in 4 border force workers will be prevented from going on strike. Let's not forget that they were the same workers lauded as heroes during the pandemic, clapped by the Prime Minister on the doorstep of Number 10. At the time, our members' sacrifice was rewarded with an insulting pay rise equivalent to just £4 a week. Since then, though, we've mounted the biggest wave of strike action in the history of PCS, with the border force at the very forefront. The Tories' game plan is clear. Pay workers poverty wages and make it illegal for them to do anything about it. It is simply grotesque. So where do we go from here? Today is an important first step. But victory in this campaign means more than words written on a page or spoken in this room. These are unprecedented times for our movement, and they require radical, bold and innovative action. We need to discuss and share tactics to beat this legislation. And just as we showed at GCHQ for all of those years ago, our strength is in our collective. So as we leave here today and ready ourselves for this war on our movement, let us remember the words of Mike Grinley. It's been a mixture of tenseness, tiredness, excitement and endurance. We always knew in our heart of hearts that we would win our rights back. So, comrades, let's join together to defend ourselves and defend our class. Solidarity.
Thanks, Fran. Call the EIS.
Thanks very much, President. Congress, Andrea Bradley, EIS. The EIS, on behalf of Scottish teachers and lecturers, today stands shoulder to shoulder in total solidarity with our fellow trade unionists across the UK, in opposition to this outrageous and frankly sinister UK government legislation designed to restrict our right to strike. Recently, EIS school-based members took the first strike action on pay in nearly 4 decades. Comrades, the people who teach our children are hardly militants determined to create disruption. Like the rest of our fellow public service colleagues, it goes against the grain of a teacher to be out on strike. They'd much rather be in the classroom doing the job that they've dedicated their lives to. But Scotland's teachers were driven to this, as they have been across the rest of the UK. In Scotland, we'd seen teacher pay eroded by 25% in real terms since 2008. And evidence of that fact was not met with shock or embarrassment by the Scottish Government and local authority employers, but with nonchalance and dissembling in negotiations. At the same time, workload was and still is through the roof, and most teachers are working on average a day's unpaid overtime a week. Class sizes of 33 bursting at the seams with no additional resources, and in fact fewer and fewer resources to support the 34% of children in mainstream classes who now have a recognised additional support need. In our FE sector right now, lecturers have been waiting since September 2022 for a pay rise. And despite the promises of no public sector redundancies by the Scottish Government, the gateway to sacking lecturers through compulsory redundancy has been opened by college principals, and only lately apprehended by the Scottish Government as a result of strike action by EIS FILA. But rather than address the real causes of strike action like ours, the pathological contempt for ordinary citizens, young and old, by this Tory Government that's hell-bent on trying to strangle the power of our unions and our movement and paralysing us into acceptance of pay and conditions that are substandard, many already anti-human. That's really what is the root of this, at the root of this legislation, and we can't and won't let that happen. The Tories claim that they want to minimise disruption to public services, but what's more disruptive to learning than having an overworked, underpaid teacher trying to teach a class of 33 young people, a third of them with unsupported additional support needs? What's more disruptive to learning than having a recruitment crisis where we can't recruit teachers or keep the experienced ones that we've got because pay is so unattractive compared to other graduate professions? And what's more disruptive to learning than the rampant poverty and the associated mental health crisis that stalks hundreds of thousands, millions of our young people across the UK because their parents and carers aren't properly paid either and are worked to the bone for it? This heinous anti-worker legislation has zero to do with protecting public services. It has everything to do with a right-wing government led by millionaires and billionaires attacking the rights of working people to act collectively to defend their livelihoods and to protect the public services that we all cherish. It took 8 days of strike action by EIS members, supported by sister unions, to finally force the Scottish Government and employers to make teachers a fair pay offer this year. Without that right to strike, there's no way that we would have won the 14.6% cumulative pay rise that we did. We know that, you know that, and the Tories know that. So the EIS is unequivocal in our commitment to stand full square with the rest of the movement in the fight for our trade union lives against the Anti-Strike Act. We support the full terms of the General Council statement, and we ask that in enacting its terms, we're sure to hold the Scottish Government to its word of opposition to the Strikes Act, because we know from experience that when it comes to it, despite the worker-friendly rhetoric, the Scottish Government waives none of the requirements of the anti-trade union legislation that's already in place, and neither do public sector employers in Scotland. They might talk a good game, but closer examination of their real-life industrial relations credentials when it comes to public sector trade disputes shows them wanting, which is why continued TUC collaboration with the Scottish TUC, which has been doing all the necessary early diplomacy in Scotland ahead of this fight for our trade union lives, is so critical. Earlier this year, Scotland's teachers and college lecturers made an informed and ethical choice to exercise their right to strike. This is a hard-fought choice that we must all protect for ourselves and for our children, who will be the next generation of workers behind us. So the EIS pledges today to stand alongside all of you and all who are prepared to fight back against this vicious Tory assault on our collective power to stand up for working people. As workers, as upholders of human rights, as Democrats, as trade unionists, we will use that collective power, we will resist and we will win. Solidarity, colleagues.
Thank you, Andrea. I'll call the RMT.
Good morning all, sisters and brothers, Congress. Hope you're all well. Mick Lynch, RMT, speaking in support of the General Council statement. And now we're at a time here when the parliamentary struggle's over and the trade union struggle has to begin. Another election could be a year away yet, and we have to do this ourselves. Defeating this law has to be done by trade unionists. We cannot rely on professional politicians of any stripe to look after workers' interests. And we can't rely on employers. There's been a lot of talk in this room this morning about employers who are going to help us out somehow. Well, I don't believe that. I think employers will use every measure in this legislation to defeat trade union action, strikes and workers' struggle. The Congress statement is a starting point for that struggle to begin to defeat this law. It contains important commitments that we need to fulfil as a movement. If unions and workers are attacked by this law, they will have the full support of the TUC. It says we will equip workers to resist the legislation at the workplace. It means we will support unions financially, politically, industrially and practically if they are sanctioned by this legislation. We have to make that happen. It means we will have a concerted campaign against an employer or a public body who is stupid enough to try and use this legislation to block the right to strike or punish workers and unions that continue the struggles. And in rail and tube, the first step will be to formally demand, not request, demand of all employers and all public bodies who have oversight of services such as the Scottish and Welsh governments and the London Mayor and the regional mayors, that they will never issue a work notice on our union and our members. And we will tell them that if they issue a work notice, they will permanently poison industrial relations and they will increase safety risks on the railway. They will encourage mass absence as people refuse to cross the picket lines. And they will be in perpetual trade dispute with my union if they deploy work notices. The only way to win is solidarity. Our brothers and sisters in ASLEF have a live dispute and the RNT will support them. but we need that solidarity across our movement. We've had 40 years of anti-trade union laws. We need a Labour government to repeal them, and we call on Mr Starmer to do just that, in full, and give us a full set of worker and trade union rights. We want all of the laws repealed in a New Deal. His New Deal is a first step. But again, we need to fight these ourselves as an independent and trade union and workers' movement. And this Congress must give the message loud and clear to all that seek to do the trade unions down. We've heard about the wobblies from Matt. He's copying my haircut and copying my thoughts these days. We've got to act as one big union. We will act together to defend our people. We will act together to defend our trade union rights and to defeat these minimum service laws. We will build the solidarity. We will campaign at work, in the courts and on the streets. We will never bow the head to the anti-trade union laws. We will never be cowed. We will stand in solidarity together. We will fight, we will strike, and we will win for our people. Solidarity to you all. Let's get out on the streets, let's get on the picket lines, and let's bring this government down. Thank you.
It is a very good hairstyle. Just before Joe starts, I'll call four unions to the front, please. CSP, NAHT, Nautilus, and TSSA. If you could come to the front. And over to Joe.
Joe Grady, General Secretary of the University and College Union. I speak here today as the representative of workers who have taken huge bouts of strike action in recent years. I stand here today as the representative of workers who have stood up against this government and employers. I stand here as a representative of workers who are being targeted as part of a distractionary culture war by this government. And I stand here as a representative of workers now targeted by minimum service levels. Minimum service levels? Rishi's mob have some bloody cheek. Nowhere have they been seen when it comes to university workers' pay, which has fallen by 25%, as MP pay soars. No minimum standards there. Nowhere to be seen demanding the threshold that trade unions have in strike ballots for themselves. No minimum standards there. Silent as our college workers' pay is over £9,000 less than teachers' pay. No minimum standards there. Our union has a long and established tradition of taking strike action. And let me be absolutely clear. We will never comply with legislation that would require one member to cross another on a picket line. Never. The TUC statement is solid. It has actions. But we have to be honest with ourselves. When push comes to shove, we are going to need proper solidarity. People on the streets, people outside workplaces, and we are going to need money. The TUC has to be a central coordinating body that raises millions of pounds to defend members and defend workers. We need to be clear that it will support any union who refuses to comply with this legislation. And this means that we need to go mainstream. The discussion we are having today, the testimony from workers that we heard, is so important. But if you don't read the Mirror or you weren't planning to be here, you possibly don't know that we're having this discussion. And that isn't because the public aren't interested. Workers in this country are under more pressure than ever before. The workers of this country are the public of this country. We will have to lead them, we will have to inspire them, and we will have to mobilise them. And I'll end on these points. Our union, UCU, will lead from the front. We need the whole movement to come together, and the TUC unequivocally leading that. This government is on the way out. Let's give them a massive shove. We need Labour to do more than just commit to reversing these attacks. We need a revolution of workers' rights. And we won't win by sitting in rooms like this. We will win by getting into every single community and running a massive public-facing campaign. Solidarity.
Thank you, Joe. I call the CSP.
Congress. I am proud to have travelled down from Newcastle to stand before you today, representing 64,000 brilliant physiotherapists, support workers and students. Every day we work with patients, their families and carers. We enable people to survive injury and ill health. We support people to live fulfilling and active lives. And this year, our members, me included, took the momentous decision to strike for the first time ever on the issue of NHS pay and staff retention. We did this for our patients, for our families and communities, and for the survival of our NHS. It was the collective defence of members who saw the damage done to our beloved NHS by years and years of austerity, of staff who saw pressures building due to our workforce crisis. Consider the long waiting times, the overstretched service, the exhausted staff struggling to make ends meet. It was our duty to act. Now, not only would minimum service levels affect our members' fundamental right to take industrial action, they would also undermine existing, well-established systems that protect the public during healthcare strikes. The CSP has a long-established practice of having local arrangements with hospital employers, known derogations to ensure that patient care and safety is maintained during industrial action. Personally, I worked tirelessly in the lead up to the strikes, hand in hand with my employer, to ensure patients were not at risk, acknowledging our fight is not with our colleagues and patients, but the government. To negate this system with the draconian, anti-democratic threat of work notices would break down the partnership working that keeps the NHS services safe during strikes. The government's own impact assessment suggests industrial disputes would likely become more protracted because of their introduction. And this breakdown would not only be contained to strikes, it would corrode the local, regional and national partnership working that has up until now kept our NHS service on life support. Workers keep the NHS running through austerity. Workers kept the NHS running through COVID-19 against all odds. To deprive workers of our democratic right now is unfair and quite frankly insulting. It is in itself a threat to our health service. You know, the one each and every one of you turn to in times of need. When you are sick, vulnerable and in need of help, we've been through all of it with you, even on strike days. We fully support the executive statement.
Thank you, Jill. Call the NAHT.
Hello, Congress. Paul Whiteman from NAHT. And Matt and Mick, I know you have high standards of presentation, so I'm sorry I've allowed my hair to grow unkempt. I shall find a barber as soon as I possibly can. Congress, this government thinks that working people are stupid. They must do if they think we're going to put up with this nonsense. The lie that there is a need to balance the fundamental right to withdraw your labour with an invented right of employers to keep operating whilst exploiting us. There is no balance. Make no mistake, this law is designed to stop us from sticking up for ourselves. Workers all stood up, carried on and risked their lives to keep this country going during the pandemic. With determination and bravery, workers kept turning up. Now we need to bring that same bravery and determination to defeat this attack on workers' rights. In education, we tried to explore with the government what they meant by minimum service levels. Now, make no mistake, those talks were designed to fail by government before they even started. And minimum service levels in schools meant 74% coverage and no action at all in primary school. That doesn't feel very minimum to me. In fact, I think the only children on the list that weren't on the list, rather, were children of trade unionists. It was clear that they thought strike action was something that workers did for fun, rather than in desperation in response to the failure of government. Apparently, generously, they will allow a few of us to take action and have our fun as long as there is no disruption. Patronising, contemptuous of workers and unrealistic. It seems to me that they don't understand why this is a fundamental right. Why, when the employer holds workers in contempt, when the employer holds the power to hire, when employers hold the power to fire, when the employer sets the terms, when the law is stacked against us, and when the government has no respect for workers, in the final analysis, what else do we have but the right to withdraw our labour and cause disruption and force change? In education, pay has been depressed by about 20%. Hours are up to about 60 hours a week. Well-being is at an all-time low. No wonder NHT members, relentlessly reasonable professionals, voted for action in the summer. But rather than deal with the cause of action, they want to remove the final shred of dignity that exhausted and exploited workers have, their right to say no more. So I say to government and the Secretary of State for Education, when you underpay us, when you overwork us, when you over-regulate us to the point of tragedy, all we have left is the right to strike. Congress, this is all about worker dignity, to be treated fairly at work and not placed in danger. It's all about human dignity, to maintain a standard of living free from fear of financial stress and confident in maintaining a home. If employers refuse to treat us with dignity and choose to return us to Dickensian Britain, all we have left is the right to withdraw our labour. That's why it's a fundamental right, and we must do everything to protect it. Now, colleagues, my delegation was having a bit of fun with me earlier on and said, would you make a fist and declare solidarity? It's not the normal way of the NAHT and not my personal style, but on this, I can say with confidence, everybody, solidarity.
You see, I told you we were going to make history today. Okay, Nautilus, please.
Robert Murda from Nautilus International. Congress, on behalf of our members, this country's maritime professionals, I bring a clear and simple message. We stand firmly in support of the General Council statement as a united trade union movement to oppose this pernicious legislation. As has been reiterated already, the right to strike is a fundamental right in any decent democratic society. It is a critical tool for us, as unions, as workers, to counteract the powerful, the government, big business, and bad bosses. Nautilus members know all about bad bosses. One name in particular will send shudders down the spine of our members. A man who proudly proclaimed before Parliament that he broke the law and would do so again. Voted the worst boss in the world. I'm referring, of course, to Mr. Peter Hebblethwaite, CEO of P&O Ferries. The CEO who sacked 786 maritime professionals, Nautilus and RMT members, without consultation, without notice, via Zoom. Shame is right. The 17th of March 2022, St. Patrick's Day, was a dark day in our country's history. It exposed what decades of attacks on trade unions lead to. Unbridled, unrestrained, unscrupulous actions in pursuit of profit over the rights, dignity and lives of working people. Thank you. Colleagues, the 17th of March should have been an epoch in industrial relations, a point where lessons were learned. Nautilus, the RMT, the TUC and others, ensuring that these lessons were learned, issued a complaint to the ILO and the Committee on the Freedom of Association. The committee's findings were a firm rebuke of the government's actions. The committee called for the UK government to ensure respect for collective bargaining and the rights of trade unions, yet there is still no action. Shockingly, but not unsurprisingly, the lessons were never learned. Instead, this government insists on yet more draconian and punitive legislation to silence workers and crush trade unions. And colleagues, one of the most worrying aspects about this legislation is the sweeping power it gives to the Secretary of State to include anyone. And I'm sure colleagues will join me in extending solidarity to Nautilus and RMT members at the Royal Fleet Auxiliary who are being balloted for industrial action after 13 years of real terms pay cuts of up to 30%. The RFA are vital to the UK's naval capabilities, yet they have faced pay cuts beyond the armed forces and other blue light services. We know this legislation will probably be used by the government to undermine any action. Yet again, rather than deal with the root of the problem, over decades of cuts and pay restraint, they will seek to silence us and crush us. Well, we're here to say we won't be silenced. Nautilus and the wider trade union movement will oppose this legislation. We will stand up for fairness and dignity for maritime professionals and all workers. Colleagues, in unity there is strength. Solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Robert. Okay, before I call TSSA, we will, after TSSA, there will be 6 more speakers. And I'll call the next batch, which is the FBU, the BDA, and the Royal College of Podiatry. TSSA, please.
Colleagues, I'm Mariam Aslamdoust, the new General Secretary of TSSA. I want to begin by thanking the TUC for bringing us here today in special conference. The fact that a gathering such as this has not been held since the days of Thatcher tell us much about the severity of the situation and the fight we now face. Legislation on minimum service levels during strikes is now on the statute book, despite our warnings and best efforts. This reckless Tory government, bunkered in Westminster, has failed to listen once again. It failed to listen to us, to sister unions, and to the wider union movement when we warned that yet more anti-strike laws would be counterproductive. We have been clear. This law was not needed and will lead to more, not fewer, disputes. In passing this legislation, the government have told us that our members, who are vital in a pandemic, are simply a thorn in their side. We all know that no workers take strikes lightly, but it's a fundamental right, a crucial part of British democracy and society, that they have the right to withdraw their labour. We have been here many times before, yes, in recent years with anti-trade union laws of varying kinds, but for us on the railways, this fight is as old as we are. I think back to the historic Taff Vale case, which tried to end the right to strike, with unions being held liable for the costs of a walkout. Our union fought this at the start of the 20th century and eventually won. That victory came about not only because we stood up across the railways and with our TUC comrades, but because we had our Labour Party backing us in Parliament. So I say now to all colleagues, Labour affiliates or not, while we keep up the pressure through campaigning, we must all work together to make sure an incoming Labour government fulfills its commitment to undoing minimum service levels legislation. It's in all our interests that we use the lessons of the past to shape not only the present, but the future, so workers in our country have the rights they deserve, including the right to strike. Solidarity with all workers. Thank you.
Thanks, Mariam. Okay, I call the FBU.
President, Matt, Congress. At the FBU, we welcome this special Congress today. We called for this Congress and we will vote in support of the General Council statement. But we still have a number of concerns with it. We feel it could have gone further and we'd have liked the opportunity for delegates in this room to make amendments to it. In Congress, given the scale of threat and damage this Act will do to our movement, we have to fight and build a campaign to make the Act inoperable. And that first and foremost means mobilising our members. Calling and asking nicely is not going to be enough. Those in power need to understand that we will never accept these laws. And let us begin and start by reiterating that for us in the Fire and Rescue Service, the minimum service levels could become an effective ban on all strike action. And let's be clear, it was the threat of a fire strike last year and this year that moved our employers on our pay offer. That is why the TUC and all affiliated trade unions must organise a fighting campaign against this Act that mobilises our members, mobilises our movement in each and every workplace. And we need to make ministers and employers realise that they have stirred up a hornet's nest with this introduction of this legislation, and if they don't back off, they will be stung. The TUC is right to pursue every political, every industrial and every legal channel available to hinder and limit the damage it will cause. But as a movement, we cannot rely on judges to rule in our favour or lawyers to defeat these laws. And as Mick said, we must all hold the Labour Party to account on the pledges that they have made. We need to organise our own actions to defeat this legislation. No one is going to do that for us. We know the whole history of anti-trade union legislation. It is there to tie us down and to shackle us. We need a political and industrial-focused campaign by each and every one of the unions that are represented here to defeat these laws. We need to build a mass opposition to minimum service levels now and aim to defeat them, or they will continue to tie our hands. And as Matt said earlier, our movement has defeated anti-trade union laws in the past. And Matt also said we know things have changed. We know that industry has changed and we know our movement is now smaller. Nevertheless, that should not prevent us from being ambitious, comrades. By building and rebuilding powerful workplace organisations, much like the mass shop stewards movement of the past. By doing that, we can build the power to take action and to coordinate across workplaces. Such a movement is not there right yet, but it can be built. Such a movement could stop these laws in their tracks. So, Congress, in closing, the scale of this threat demands a robust response. The primary legislation has been imposed, but the fight is not yet over. The details of individual minimum service levels in some industries is yet to be imposed. We still have many opportunities to push this back. The FBU is urging the TUC to rise, to resist and to reclaim our activist roots. We need more campaigning, more mobilisation and more action until we have smashed the Minimum Service Level Act to pieces. Congress, we have to fight. We have no alternative.
Thanks, Steve. BDA, please.
Thank you, President. Comrades, Annette Mansell-Green from the British Dietetic Association supporting the General Council statement. And in doing so, I seem to recognise that some might say this is the TUC getting off its knees. BDA members, dietitians, what do? They work in the health service. They work in the community. They work in public health. They work in paediatrics, oncology, critical care. And during the pandemic, they joined colleagues from across the NHS, donning that PPE, inadequate as it was to start with, to treat patients in critical care, putting their own lives at risk. This is a profession that I'm told years ago was called the twin set and pearls profession, not a group of workers that you can easily imagine taking strike action. But it's a very different story today. They've suffered 13 years of pay cuts. They're working in a dwindling NHS. There aren't enough of them to provide a safe service. Never mind minimum service levels. What we need is maximum service delivery in our public sector. So at the beginning of this year, we achieved a mandate for industrial action, and our members were fighting to get out on that picket line. Why did it take that threat of industrial action for the Secretary of State to open the door and say, come into talks with us on pay? We shouldn't need to do that. Nobody takes it lightly. It was the last option open to them. As others have said, this is a fundamental right. The ILO says so. The European Human Rights say so. And this legislation is nothing more than a cynical attack on workers' rights and an existential threat to our movement. A movement born out of struggle, and comrades, that struggle continues to this day. It's a spiteful, ideologically driven attack on trade unions and civil society, an attempt to win votes, and comrades, it will fail. We will ensure that it fails. It's a disproportionate reaction to recent industrial action, which, don't forget, could have been avoided by good, meaningful industrial relations. The current government and big business want to keep workers in their place with low pay, poor conditions, 0 hours contracts, insecure employment and dreadful working conditions. They want us to go back to cap in hand, pleading for pay rises and decent terms and conditions. And then if we protest through industrial action, they want to sack us, take the funds from our unions and generally beat us down. Well, we've fought before and we will win. We will win again, and we will fight, and we will win. We will work in solidarity. We will use all means necessary to fight for the rights of our members and end this draconian legislation. We will be there for the first and every worker sacked for going on strike, and we will not cross a picket line. And comrades, employers in the NHS don't want this, in the public sector don't want this. In fact, many of them are trade union members as well. I'm getting the red light, but I will say, our fundamental human rights cannot be swept away like this by an unelected PM and a cabinet of the entitled. How dare they treat us with such contempt? We will not be silenced. I'll end on this. We have the right to withdraw our labour as a last resort, and to remove that is frankly inhumane. A quote from a famous socialist anthem. We toilers from all fields united, join hand in hand with all who work. The earth belongs to us, the workers. No room here for the shirk. Comrades, in solidarity.
Thanks. Thanks, Annette. Before the next speaker, if I can call the final three union speakers to the front, please. CWU, NAPO, and Equity. Anwar, please.
Hi everyone, Anwar Ali from the Royal College of Podiatry, speaking in support of the General Council's statement. So colleagues, today we stand united to voice our collective concerns in relation to this proposed legislation. It has far-reaching consequences for our movement. It undermines the very foundation of workers' rights, collective bargaining power, and the right to protest. The crux of the matter is simple yet profound. By imposing MSL, the government effectively weakens our ability to strike. The right to withdraw labour is not only a fundamental right of trade unionism, it's not merely about abstaining from work, but it is a critical lever, a way for us in order to fight and achieve better conditions and fairer wages for our members. Now, with regards to the healthcare sector, the government declares their intention is to uphold patient safety and protection. But let's not be misled by these appearances. For beneath this veil of safeguarding lies a strategy that not only undermines the rights of healthcare workers, but also poses a significant threat to the essence of fair bargaining and the very efficacy of our healthcare system. It is a direct attack on our capacity to advocate for the necessary improvements that our healthcare system desperately needs. We are not just fighting for the rights of healthcare workers, we are fighting for the quality of care that every patient deserves. The government would have us believe that the MSL legislation is there to protect patients, but if that was the case, we would see a fully funded NHS and safe levels of staffing every day. Now, it is worth remembering that within the NHS, within the healthcare sector, we have a tradition of agreements between employees and unions, known as local derogations. So we ensure that life and limb services are respected. So we don't need this legislation. The MSL law, it attempts to shift the focus from the real issues which plague our healthcare system. Instead of addressing the root causes, such as long waiting times, the lack of modern and efficient facilities, the critical strategies that we need to prevent things such as staff burnout, the government is trying to sugarcoat and camouflage their attack. We must advocate for investment within our healthcare infrastructure, for policies which address staff shortages and burnout, and for a fair working environment where the rights of workers are upheld. By framing unions as disruptors, the government seeks to erode any public sympathy and support for our movement. It is essential that we counter this sort of narrative and we highlight the importance of our fight for our members, not only for fair treatment, but for decent wages and a safe working environment for them. We fully support the General Council's statement on this matter and the issues in relation to the data protection concerns, the potential for biased algorithms enforcing MSL. MSL is not a solution, it is a hindrance. It is one which risks breaching international law. It must be challenged, it must be re-evaluated, and ultimately it must be repealed. We applaud the Labour Party's commitment, the importance of their pledge. Within the first 100 days, a new working deal for working people. We must stand united. We must stand against this MSL legislation for the hard-fought rights which we have achieved. It not only undermines our ability to bargain collectively, but our right to strike. Let us rally our members. Let us engage in meaningful dialogue with policymakers. Let's raise awareness amongst the public. We will not be silenced, together and in solidarity. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anwar. I call the CWU.
Yeah, President Congress, Dave Wall, Communication Workers Union, and to obviously offer our full support to the General Council statement, but to talk a little bit more about what we're going to do about the actions that are set out in the statement. Congress, when the pandemic ended, there should have been a change in the balance of forces in the world of work. What was laid bare to everybody, that without working class people, society didn't function. But it never happened. It never happened, not because of the Tories, not because of the Labour Party, because we didn't take the opportunity to bring all of the strength that we have collectively in here together. What happened instead was that our members, working class people, up and down the UK, had to suffer through gross mismanagement by the Tories of the economy, the worst cost of living crisis in decades. And we came and we fought back, and every single trade union right across the board showed the courage, and our members right across the board showed the courage and the spirit that we have amongst us. Well, if we're going to defeat this bill...
is often temporary, but class, especially our class, and the principles on which it was founded are very much a permanent fixture. Thank you, Congress.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian. I call Equity.
Hi, Congress. Sam Swan from Equity. Comrades, the members of Equity stand in full solidarity and full support with the General Council's statement to resist these absurd and disgraceful minimum service levels. We know the Tories are fundamentally unserious, full stop, but we know the Tories are fundamentally unserious about public services. So anything they say about, minimum service levels being in order to strengthen public services, we know this is nonsense. Everyone knows this is nonsense. As Sam from Unison, another Sam, said earlier on, why aren't there minimum service levels for non-strike days if they care so much about this? And so while the Tories are fundamentally unserious about public services, they are very much serious about class war, about attacking the ability of workers to organise. The Tories have always been serious about this. It is their reason for being. And so, while the minimum service levels do not affect us yet, to kind of crudely paraphrase James Baldwin in his letter to Angela Davis, if they come for you in the morning, they will be coming for the rest of us that night. Our members have been really inspired by the bravery and the steadfastness, is that word? Steadfastness and strength of our comrades who have been engaged in industrial action over the last couple of years. We were very close to joining the waves of strike action in our negotiations for better pay and conditions on the West End, which ended with a 16.7% pay increase for our members. This was totally, thanks very much. Well, I mean, in a way, you're applauding yourselves because this was absolutely down to the solidarity from the movement. You absolutely inspired us in our sector to fight and to kind of increase our confidence. It was also due to the fear felt by employers, and we absolutely need to make sure that, I was going to say make employers scared again, but that sort of has sort of bad connotations. But it's true, we want to make employers scared again. And so yes, that was definitely down to you and the way that you inspired us. And it will definitely inspire us again when we go into our pay negotiations for our new screen deal for TV and film in the new year. Our union is becoming more and more industrially focused and stronger every day, which is why we feel so deeply that we cannot have our movement weakened by these disgraceful Tories. This is a historic moment. As we know, we haven't had a special Congress like this for over 40 years. We in Equity are proud to stand as part of this movement to resist and defeat minimum service levels and all attacks on our ability to organise as workers. We want to escalate from non-compliance to kicking them out of power and to holding the Labour Party to account, making them feel the pressure from our powerful movement. An injury to one is an injury to all. And as Paul said, if they come for one worker, they will face us all. Solidarity, comrades. Non-compliance can and will win. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all the unions who contributed to that debate. We've heard. I'll bring Paul in 1 second. Thanks very much for everyone's contribution, hearing such a range of views and experiences. I particularly thank those delegates who stuck to the time limits, and I'll just say you'll find a slightly different Matt Rack at Congress in September. So with that, I'll invite Paul to make some closing remarks.
President, Congress, the President started the debate today by saying nothing happens without the workers. So before I say anything else, if you could just show your appreciation for all the TUC staff and stewards that have helped deliver today. I mean, this is not a precedent. Don't say to us every single year, why have one Congress when you can have two? This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity, comrades. Listen, thank you for the opportunity to stand together and express as one our opposition to the government attack on the right to strike. Today, we have heard directly from those workers at the sharp end of this legislation, from health professionals, firefighters, border security staff, nuclear decommissioning staff, teachers and lecturers. And we've also heard from unions that aren't yet in the government's firing line, from NAPO, from the CWU, from Equity, Nautilus, USDOR, many more represented here today, all embodying that basic trade union principle that unity really is strength. The solidarity has been inspirational. Thank you very much, Congress. Now our job is to turn that General Council statement into action. So here's what we will do next. Ministers will be desperate if they can to use their new powers to deprive workers of the right to strike. So we will be forcing and calling on employers across all the sectors affected to make it clear that they will not issue a single work notice to a union. If those work notices are issued, our movement has to respond, not only naming and shaming every dodgy employer that issues a work notice, not only challenging every single work notice that is sent to a union, we'll be asking our movement to demonstrate its solidarity, for people to get to those picket lines, to get to their protests in numbers, just like we did when P&O illegally sacked 700 workers over Zoom. We want to make sure we send that notice to every employer. You send a work notice to our unions, you threaten the right to strike, you should expect to find 48 unions ready to respond, ready to support, and ready to win.
Yeah.
Now, in this movement, we've got long memories. We've had mention today of Taff Vale, In Places Strife, the Industrial Relations Act. We know this is just the latest chapter in the list of Tory attempts to shut down trade unionism. Now, it's already been referenced, but in January, it is 40 years since Margaret Thatcher banned workers in GCHQ from being in a union. A despicable, politically motivated decision. But those workers didn't give up, they fought, and they won. So remember our history. This movement has outlasted and outfought Tory governments before, and this time we won't be waiting 13 years for justice. We'll kick that law off the statute book next year within the first 100 days of a Labour government. So let's come back after Christmas and the New Year with even more resolve. Join us in Cheltenham in January. Let's learn the victories of our past. Let's steel ourselves for the fight we're in today, and let's defeat these draconian laws. And my last thought is this. Thinking back to GCHQ, the real enemies within in this country aren't driving ambulances or working in train stations. They're not in our classrooms. They're not in our civil servants. The real enemies within in this country sit round the cabinet table. So let's make sure 2024 is the year we kick them out of office and deliver that new deal for workers. Solidarity, Congress.
Thanks for those remarks, Paul. OK, I'm going to put the General Council statement to the vote. I'd urge you to vote clearly. Put your hands clearly up in the air if you're able. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. All those against, please show. No, there's none. OK. Someone slow taking a hand down there. OK, that is carried. Very pleased to announce that that is carried. Well done, Congress. Congress, before we close, I'd like to remind you there will be some photographs taken with all delegates, please, if you can bear with us for a few minutes. So if you can hold on for a few minutes, the banners are coming into the hall for the photos. Stewards will now bring those into the hall. If your union has brought a banner, you may need 2 volunteers to help to hold it up. And then you'll be directed about where to stand or sit for the photographs to be taken. So please just bear with us. Thank you. Yeah, it was, yeah.
Okay.
No, right. Cheers. Cheers. Well done both. Well done all. It was very good, yeah. This is going to be fun as we try and get banners erected in time.
Antonia, Antonia, have we got more of these signs? Because I was hoping Sharon might have one.
Hello, 1, 2.
No, okay.
Let him know when you finish with it.
Who's directing the delegates? Do you want to give the delegates? Do you want me to call them to order? Yeah, we'll
I'm going to see the banners.
Okay.
Fine, but we need all the delegates in the middle.
Okay. Delegates, please can you turn around to face me? I'm at the back of the hall. And I'd like delegates to move into the centre of the hall, please. Okay. Delegates, can you fill from the centre for me, please? Moving in. Sharon's got one. Good. All right, we've got one. And General Secretary members, if you wanted to come to the front, you'd be very welcome. Okay. Okay, I still need a few more in the middle. Just here, please. Can we have a few more move into the middle, please? There. Okay, delegates, on 3, protect the right to strike. 1, 2, 3.
Protect the right to strike! Protect the right to strike! Protect the right to strike! Protect
All right. People on the sides, you need to come into the middle. Delegates from the NEU, bring yourselves this way. And on 3, protect the right to strike. 1, 2, 3.